What really makes this work interesting, as far as I'm concerned, is Cho-Cho-San. She's called Madama Butterfly because that is sort of, as it were, her nom de plume, or her performance name. What is really interesting is there's a lot of similarity between Madama Butterfly and Greek tragedy. For one thing, we have a woman in the centre, a woman who appears to be very poor, very sort of down on her luck, maybe even a little bit sorry for herself. But this is where we see her at the beginning, but as the opera grows, she too grows in stature. She has tremendous confidence in the love that she had for Pinkerton, the man she married, and even though we become increasingly aware that that love is not being reciprocated, her own love grows and grows until we see in it a source of strength. And when eventually she in fact sort of discovers, it's a tremendous moment, an incredibly powerful orchestral passage. When she discovers that she has been betrayed, we get the sense that there is a sort of a power of anger and revenge that in some ways has the stature of some of the great classical heroines. I always, in fact, in many ways, feel she's rather like a sort of a modern day Medea. Now Medea, we know, was abandoned by her husband, and Medea actually murdered her 2 children, and in fact Butterfly herself does have a child, and the opera ends at the moment where we think she is actually going to kill the child, but in fact doesn't, and she in fact kills herself. It's a very powerful moment, and we feel that in fact sort of she is operating not from a position of weakness, but from a position of strength. Pinkerton he's not big enough to be a villain. He's not large enough, he's not threatening enough, not somebody we love to hate. For example, Scarpia in Tosca, he is a true villain, he's an absolute monster. We don't feel that for Pinkerton. Pinkerton's much more everyday. He says one thing and does another. From the very, very beginning of the opera, an excellent scene between Pinkerton and Sharpless, who is the US consul in Nagasaki. And Sharpless in the very beginning is saying, look, this girl is taking it seriously. We really should not be leading her on the way that we are. And Pinkerton just says, oh, no, that doesn't matter. I'm just going to sort of marry her now. Well, marry. And then he starts drinking whiskey, and he says, and I'm going to have a grand old time with her, and then I'll go back and I'll get myself a real American wife. That is actually the words that he uses, a real American wife. And I think our feeling for him is very, very ambivalent. Okay, we can see there's a surface sort of attraction to him, there's a certain romanticism, or romantic quality to him. I think we can see why Butterfly is attracted to him. Of course, at the end of Act 1, he completes with her one of the most accomplished love duets in the entire operatic literature. There are very few love duets that are quite as moving as a love duet that ends Act 1 of Madama Butterfly. But when he comes back, and he brings his wife with him, you wonder, why is he coming back? I mean, this is such a tasteless thing to do. He doesn't have the courage to come up and say to her, look, I'm terribly sorry, but I got married in America, and then just leave. Oh no, he comes, and he sort of, it's almost as if he wants her to sort of tell Butterfly what is going on rather than him. And in actuality, Butterfly does eventually realise that Pinkerton is married because she sees Kate Pinkerton in the garden, and then she realises that in fact she's been betrayed. But the other moment, it was in the second version of Madame Butterfly. Puccini wrote a small aria for Pinkerton as he comes back and he's alone in the garden looking out and saying, "Oh, what a wonderful place this is. Ah, I have such wonderful memories of the joy that we had with this young woman and everything." And you just feel, get off the stage. Makes Pinkerton into somebody who we despise more than we do hate. Puccini, for a start, incorporates very interestingly and in a completely non-patronizing way. He incorporates Japanese scales, Japanese instruments into the music. So one really gets sort of a sense, an oral sense of the interweaving of let's say, East and West, rather than a conflict between East and West. But I do think that the world that Madame Butterfly comes from and her own private world is something he treats with immense sympathy. The story of Madame Butterfly had been around for a few years before Puccini set it to music. And then the next thing was Belasco did a one-act play of it, pretty much of a potboiler of a play. Puccini saw it in London. Actually, the moment that really impressed him in that performance was Madame Butterfly waiting for Pinkerton to return. And that is the point that in his opera he wrote the humming chorus. So in some ways that was almost sort of, that is what really, for him, that's the kernel of the opera. The opera itself was not a success when it was first performed. In fact, it was downright not a success. It was booed, it was hissed, people kept on yelling out saying, "We heard that in Bohème," and La Scala audiences can be pretty vituperous when they wish to be. But anyway, it was not at all well received, and Puccini was devastated. So he withdrew it. And he sat down and he rewrote it. He turned it from 2 acts into 3. And he added some things and he changed some things. The second version had a premiere in the city of Brescia in May of 1904. January 1904 was the Scala, May was Brescia. And then it went through 5 different versions. The version we hear today is the version that actually was first done at the Opéra Comique in Paris in 1908. This is the final version, and we stick to it. One of the great things about Madame Butterfly is it's very tense, it's very concentrated. The focus is uniquely upon Cho-Cho-San herself, or what is going on inside her. The more I get to know the opera, the more difficult that question is. But let me mention, the obvious one is the entrance of Butterfly in Act 1. And she comes up onto the stage. She comes up the hill. Her house is at the top of the hill. And the music, which introduces the theme that we're going to associate with Butterfly right the way through, is beautifully unfolded, very, very high strings. It's one of those moments where sort of unexpectedly suddenly brings tears to your eyes, and it has a quiet grandeur to it. This is where the smallness of the character actually is presented in a situation that makes her more and more important, larger and larger. And even when she comes on, we sort of think of her as a figure of utter beauty. Other moments, let me go through the famous ones. Love Duet, of course. This is what, 15-20 minute love duet, and it's, I would say, in the 3 or 4 most sort of greatest love duets written. It has a sort of a wonderful flow to it. It develops, a lot of the music develops out of the entry of Butterfly onto the stage at the beginning. You get the sense that sort of it's a combination of the erotic and the beautiful, which is not too difficult to do, and certainly not unusual, but it's done to a degree of refinement and a degree of sexual passion that I think is almost unequal on the opera stage. And this is an interesting thing. We realise even then that Pinkerton's sexual passion is just going to dissolve. And oddly enough, it makes the love duet even more moving, because we know that love is not going to last, and we know that betrayal is going to come, and that very knowledge, I think, does not sort of make us say, oh no, I don't want to hear this. It just sort of says, how wonderful this is, if only this moment could last. Of course, moments never last, no. In the second act, well, of course, there's her famous aria, Un bel dì vedremo, one fine day, Pinkerton's going to come back, and actually, it's a wonderful piece because musically it follows the growth of her excitement as she's going to see Pinkerton, and she ends with this, and there he comes. Well, she's just imagined it in her mind, and now she goes, but then what happens for the rest of the act is we actually see that come out in reality. And of course the ending is not nearly as fulfilling and as happy as she hoped it would be. There's one figure in the opera, Sharpless, the baritone, who in some ways is rather characterless. He's the US consul, but he's such a marvellously likable person, which actually gives the opera a certain balance here. You know, we don't entirely hate everything American. And he really, in fact, identifies much more with Butterfly than he does with Pinkerton. And there's a very moving scene where he tries to make her read the letter, and eventually he says to her, what would it be like if Pinkerton never returned? She explodes. This is the great passionate moment, and she goes rushing off stage, and she comes rushing back with her little boy and says, and this boy, what will happen to him? And we hear in the orchestra the Stars and the Stripes. It's harsh, it frightens you, and you realize, I mean, this is a wonderful example of how music can be used to really put forward a particular dramatic situation, and in fact even a set of ideas and ideals. So that scene I find is very moving. There's of course the humming chorus. The music is so beguiling that we are just completely caught up in the music. When Robert Wilson did it down in LA, in what was a really good production, he actually did have the boy as being quite a bit older. He was about, 10 years old, and he danced during the humming chorus, which again was quite interesting, but I think actually it's much more a question of just sitting and listening. And it's Chocho-san, her son, and then Suzuki, who is her companion. They sit there almost like sort of classical gods, and they just listen to that music. And that's another thing, by the way, that makes it very classical. It was customary in Greek drama, before the hero dies, to have a chorus sung in his or her praise. And that's the chorus. Oh, there's another passage. This one often is missed out on entirely. Eventually, Chocho-san realizes that she's going to lose her little boy. And she calls Kate Pinkerton to her, and she says, you are the luckiest woman in the world, and you have a great happiness, and I give you my child because of that happiness, as if that happiness is going to at least sort of work beautifully for the son. And she demonstrates there the generosity that we normally think of as being characteristic of tragic heroes who are about to die. And that's another moment where she rises very, very much in our estimation. I find that's almost the most moving moment in the play. betray my sort of how old-fashioned I am here now by saying that my favourite recording is still the one that I listened to when I was a teenager, and this is the Renata Tebaldi Giuseppe Campora. But there are many other ones. Mirella Freni did a tremendous one with Jose Carreras and Giuseppe Sinopoli conducting. And Sinopoli conducts it as if it is Wagner. Puccini himself accepted this, that like all other composers, he had been tremendously strongly influenced by Wagner. That is really worth getting. You really should not miss seeing this Madama Butterfly. It has some of Puccini's finest and most melodic music. Indeed, it is as musically rich as La Bohème or as Tosca. It is, in some ways, the most impressive and imposing work that he wrote. It's the work where he reached, I think, a high point in opera, not necessarily in writing a grand piece, but much more in writing a work in which the score really goes into first the minds of the characters in the center, but it also in fact makes us aware of a whole world of values and also a world of different cultures and them. You get this sense of from this very small drama, you get the sense of a much larger series of conflicts developing. It's a work that you will find will your mind, even though at the end you will, I hope, be quite devastated by the death of Butterfly, because it is a very, very moving moment. At the same time, you should go out with your mind enlightened, because you can clearly understand how it is that the small people of this world, for heaven's sakes, that's just about all of us,